Welcome to the Senior Care Growth Show, where senior living sales and marketing leaders go to grow. I'm your host, Rick Whittington, and today we are going to dive into one of the most pressing challenges in senior living today. That is hiring and human resources. So before we get into our interview today, I wanted to tell you that our team recently published a guide aimed at helping make your website a sales engine. The guide will show you how to use your website to generate prospective residents and ultimately increase occupancy in your communities. So if you'd like to check that out, go to seniorcaregrowth.com/guide. And I'll also include the link in the show notes for you as well. On the Senior Care Growth website, you'll also find a blog and an archive for all of our podcast episodes, and all of those are free for you to check out. So today on the podcast, we're talking about hiring frontline staff. Finding and retaining frontline staff is a critical issue that impacts the quality of care and the overall success of senior living communities. And so that's why I'm thrilled today to introduce our guest, Kacey Devine from Procare HR. Kacey has extensive experience in helping senior living organizations recruit and retain top talent. So you should get your pen and your paper ready because Kacey brings invaluable insights and practical solutions during our conversation today. So in this episode, we're going to explore the state of the job market, the unique challenges faced by senior living communities in the hiring process. We're also going to discuss effective strategies for attracting and retaining dedicated staff and learn about innovative approaches to creating a supportive and thriving workplace culture, because we all know that culture is really, really important in hiring and retaining staff. So whether you're struggling to fill positions or looking to improve your HR practices, you won't want to miss this conversation. So here's my conversation with Kacey Devine. Welcome to the podcast, Kacey.
Hey, thanks, Rick. Appreciate you having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you too. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about your background and how you got into HR, in particular, maybe in the senior living sector?
Sure. We'll start with a Forrest Gumpian story then. It's not a straight path. So I actually got into the HR space via sales, and I didn't even intend to be in sales back in the day. So I got my start in HR tech and outsourcing sales and sales leadership. And that's what I've really been hung my shingle on for the past 10 years or so. And one of the things I found, even just back when I was carrying a bag and annoying people door to door, was that I loved the conversations around HR. I was the person who took advantage of the continuing education opportunities to go get fundamental payroll certifications and PHR certifications, human capital strategist, all of this different stuff, because I really just was fascinated with the content and also came to understand a little bit more that like the three pillars of an organization are like a product or service people will exchange money for. It's some sort of capitalization and cash flow. And then people to me are the more interesting one, because I've seen organizations have great of the other two. And if you don't win on the people game, you won't win ever. And so that's really where I've stuck. And I think I'll probably be sticking until they kick me out.
And I think people probably is the most unpredictable one of those three, right?
Yeah. If it wasn't, we'd have a lot more stock market millionaires. I'll say that.
Very good. So let's talk about your company, Procare HR. Why don't you talk a little bit about what they do?
Yeah. Our company is a growing company based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, that is super mission driven. We're an HR managed services firm that really specializes in senior living operations. And so we work with typically mid-sized to large operators and help with all of the headaches that HR and workforce bring. One of the things that's not too much of a secret is that that's been plaguing the industry for quite a while, and that there really hasn't been a silver bullet, so to speak. And I'm not going to claim that we have a silver bullet, but we have found some ways to incrementally help and make that more successful than it has been on the open market. And so we partner with operators all day and just try to make that part of the business, that part of the operation a little bit easier so that they can really focus on driving great outcomes for the residents and great care outcomes when appropriate.
Yeah, I like what you said about driving, the quality of care. So the focus of senior living organizations obviously is driving that quality of care, but then they also have to have people to help them live out that mission. And so you let the cat out of the bag if it's not already out of the bag, and I know it is in the industry. So I know a lot of senior living organizations are struggling to hire people right now. But since you're an expert, I thought I would ask you, what's the state of the hiring environment right now in senior living? What can we expect going through the rest of 24 and maybe into 2025?
I'll answer that in a little bit of a bifurcated way. I think that community level leadership dictates the state of hiring in senior living and senior care. When you have great community level leadership, it's pretty good. And you see these operators that we've sat down with that, they don't have openings. And when they do, they have a pool of referrals from existing employees because the culture is amazing and all of this. And I've seen that both in urban and rural settings. I've seen all of that. I've seen where they're innovating and trying to figure out how to even import really qualified professionals from other parts of the world. Then I typically see then the other side of it, which is the more reality macroeconomically, which is that there are more jobs than job seekers. And just right there is the crux of the problem, because if there is a job seeker, obviously there's geographic and skill-based limitations of whether or not someone can take a job. But you start thinking of, they're probably going to go to the path of least resistance. They're also going to probably go to the path that pays them the best. And that's usually where the wheels start falling off the bus. That being said, really strong leadership that can drive a culture will absolutely eat that stuff for lunch. So that's why I tried to just highlight the leadership as part of that discussion.
I love the fact that you said culture is so important. And I think, I've read that a lot too, where companies that pay more often maybe don't get a job candidate because the work environment is better somewhere else. Maybe they give them a little bit more balance, or they give them a little bit more leeway to do their job well. So we've definitely seen that too as we've worked with companies. How has the current job market impacted the actual strategies that senior living is using for recruitment?
Mm-hmm. Rick, you hit it on the head. I mean, if money was everything, I'm not saying it's not important. If it was everything in a candidate's decision, you'd see a lot more people volunteering to climb windmills to change the light bulb at the top. That's not the case. So it's not everything. And so we're starting to see, I'd say, again, a couple really key things. So number one is work-life integration with operators that really do a great job there. And I say that in lieu of balance on purpose, I'd say, because it's the folks who are helping folks understand work is part of life and integrate that into it so that, when a child comes along or there's a snowstorm, they're not wildly surprised. That's that part. And the other side I would want to note to the answer of that question is folks who are getting quite good at being creative. And what I mean by that is, not a secret that, every organization is different, but then also senior living, senior housing in general is a unique subset. Not, if you're going, let's talk, frontline workers or something like that. A really impressive healthcare plan might help get executives, might help get the leadership in the door, but on-demand wage access might be the thing that helps there. Or again, flexible shifts or whatever it might be. That's the trends that are really taking off.
I like what you said about work-life integration. I actually saw a LinkedIn post that you made, I think maybe it was yesterday or the day before, about work-life integration and how balance assuming work is a part of life, right? So you're going to have to make time for that. So what are some of the most significant challenges that senior living communities are facing when recruiting frontline staff specifically?
Yeah, I think it's number one is communicating the vision of what it means to work in the industry to an outsider. One of the conversations I've had in the past is that our industry feels like a little bit of a small town. And if you're not from that town, it's hard to get integrated. And if you are from that town, you know everybody. And so we need to do a better job welcoming people and kind of opening it up and doing the, donut session, so to speak. Welcome people in, get them integrated. That's one of the challenges. Second challenge is that, like, let's call a spade a spade. Some of the frontline work is hard. It is. And why I answered with the mission first is because it's hard, and it isn't always if you did the same task, let's say someone who's working in the kitchen or whatever, it might be maintenance even for a frontline worker. Those roles could be in hospitality, they could be in the restaurant business. I mean, they could be in a hospital, and that might pay more or might be closer or whatever it is. And so I think the challenge is communicating the mission and the vision of why the work is important. And, hey, if you have the option of doing the same job in 4 different places and the pay is within plus or minus 5 to 7%, why would you want to work for the one that's going to make you feel better about your job and make you feel like you're contributing to society, which 110% without question is our industry. I think we just need to wrap it up better and put a bow on it, eh?
That's great. Yeah, the why is incredibly important, I think. And you talked about communicating mission. So if I'm in corporate HR at a senior living organization, what are some ways I can do that? What are some ways I can actually communicate the mission of our organization so that people would want to, when we post a job, reply to that?
Yeah, document. I'll spare listeners here of having to hear about like showing up to the career fair and getting engaged with your local trade schools and community colleges and high schools, because if you're not doing that at some sort of scale, I don't know where you've been. What I would say is document. Like, the average job earner or job seeker, is probably within some sort of scope of your community already. And so if you're doing a good job on any social media, documenting what it's like to be there and continuing to reinforce, hey, we're ABC community, we stand for X, Y, and Z. And continuing to like reinforce that on even, yes, LinkedIn, but Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, maybe residents aren't there, maybe they are, but the folks that you're going to be recruiting absolutely are there. The folks who are really like starting to see that trend are winning because they're getting an opportunity to, kind of have you along for the ride on demand. So that when you go post that job, people know like, hey, ABC community is a great place. And like, it seems like people are really fulfilled and happy and don't hate showing up on Monday morning. And when they post that job, like, hey, I've actually been looking for them, and maybe I'm not looking for that job, but I've been wanting to get into that organization for a while, so I'll apply. And again, like, is that a little bit of rose-colored glasses? Absolutely. But like, you do have to start somewhere. And I think documentation of day-to-day life and not just when the pizza party happens is really important, showing that you really care about your people.
Yeah, so I made a connection there when you were talking about human resources and marketing.
Yeah.
And branding too, right? Because if you've got an organization that has a brand, so your organization is going to have a brand, whether you know it or not, right? And so if someone knows you as someone who's always in the community, they're sponsoring activities, they're at different places and events and career fairs, things like that. But also, you're talking about your mission. And you do that and you do it consistently. That seems more like a marketing activity for me. You talked about social media and being consistent and all, in all those places. That really is a strong takeaway for me here, is that, you really have to think of this not as just a recruiting activity, but as a marketing activity in the way that your organization is perceived, your community is perceived.
Rick, you're dead on. And I know I'm a little bit biased having a marketing degree, but I would say that if your conceptualization of marketing is just top of funnel leads for folks who can be part of your community and help generate revenue, you have a very limited view of marketing. And I would also argue that even more importantly, it really is internal and external relations, because we don't operate in manufacturing where a machine does the work. Like, the quality of care, the quality of experience is 100% driven by people. And without that, there isn't a mission, there isn't, an opportunity for residents or anything like that. So in my eyes, I think that that's probably got to go up several rungs as we get into 2025.
Yeah. So once you have staff, at a senior living community, how do you keep them motivated? I mean, there's so many ups and downs to the job, so many positives and negatives, and it seems like a lot of what we're hearing in the news is more on the negative front. But how do you keep them engaged and motivated to do their jobs well?
Well, it's primarily food trucks and pizza parties. I'm kidding. It's I'll get a little bit philosophical to answer your question and then reel it in. Motivation is transient. Like, I sometimes wake up feeling motivated and I sometimes don't. And let's just understand that and have that as a baseline for this part of our discussion. Humans are not inherently motivated. Motivation will end. I'm going to come back like a broken drum to the same thing. Why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this work? Why did you get up here? Why did you drive into work or commute in? Why not go do something else? Why not work from home and do something that, you're clicking buttons on your computer? Because people matter, right? Like, we need, if that isn't almost annoyingly in every email, in every communication, in every performance review, remind people, because what that is the antidote to motivation. It's purpose. And there's several books on what people can do when they have a high sense of purpose. And I think that there are a lot of purpose-driven professionals in our community and in our industry. There absolutely are. We also just need to recognize that, are we kind of through a lot of the meat of COVID? Yes, but it drained a lot of that. And, hey, that tank is a little bit more empty. And now that we've all had a second to breathe, let's fill that back up. And that will help drive retention.
When we talked initially, you mentioned several creative ways of finding candidates. So you mentioned international recruiting being one of them, and also some interesting ways for just finding referrals. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've seen, without getting into specifics, because I would advise you to do your research, find what works for your organization. You can reach out to us if you'd like to have a conversation about it, but there are initiatives bringing, I'd say, three different ways. Number one, I've seen actually importing qualified professionals from countries in Asia and in Africa, as well as some in Eastern Europe. And then the second thing I've seen is working to fill some more administrative tasks, even remotely, via countries in Central America and South America. That's something that I've seen because of the time zone alignment there. So that's been something unique. There are folks who are really begging to work, that are really hard workers and would love the opportunity to help out. And calling a spade is sometimes, there just isn't the job pool. Those seekers just aren't there. I mean, maybe you are operating in a small town or a small city, and there just actually aren't any people, even if you got creative, and you have to change that. So that's one thing that we've seen folks be successful with. The second thing is, you are a combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So whether you like it or not, get out to the top half of your employment base, the people that you'd like, if we had clones of that person, we would really like it. And just, maybe there's a referral bonus or something like that, but tell them about what you're trying to do. Why that matters, why that impacts them, why that impacts the folks that you're providing care for and ask like, hey, would you mind sending, this email to a few of your friends or just mentioning it that like, hey, if you're ever looking for a job, contact, don't even go to our job board, contact this person, because we all know that the job board might not even be completely 100% up to date anyway. So like, we want to make sure we're capitalizing on that. And then the third thing is like, I say this from a sales perspective. If you got dropped in a place you weren't familiar with and all you had was a phone, what would you do? Like how would you do your job? And so like, all right, hey, I need candidates. No, none of them are applying. I don't have any referrals. Like start going to places where maybe there are some adjacent skills, like go contact those folks, and do a little bit of guerrilla marketing, get creative, like, because there are folks in hospitality, restaurants, and maintenance in different places. And you know what? There are folks I would say out there that if they understood, even from a nursing perspective, what's available to them, maybe they would go through some career training to shift. That's something that's very possible.
You just given us a waterfall of helpful information. Let me double back on a couple of these and ask a couple follow-up questions. So
Sure.
you mentioned referral bonuses. I'm just curious. I know probably our listeners might be anxious to know this. What's a competitive referral bonus in the market today?
A little bit of a nebulous question. And part of why I'm saying that is because what's in Miami is different than the operator in Wichita, Kansas. So my recommendation, because I'm not going to give you the answer, I want you to actually do something. Go to surveymonkey.com and send that out to that top half of employees or a select few of employees that you would want to get referrals from, and ask, would a referral bonus make a difference in your likelihood to refer your friends to jobs here? That's the first thing. Second thing, what do you think is a fair referral bonus for doing that? Get the information. You know what I mean? Like what's different, it's always going to be different. So a couple more practical things, like the more executive or skilled the role, I would say the more it should be. A blanket thing is not necessarily the best way there. If you have somebody who's evangelizing for your community and they happen to go get your new executive director pulled away from somewhere else or something like that, like that deserves some recognition. Don't underestimate, the last thing I'll say on this, don't underestimate the power of just recognition, even outside of money. Like we get so caught up in our day to day, and really what we're talking about is behavior change. And how many folks do you think are out there that have recommended your community to one of their friends, and someone said, "Oh, okay, cool, we'll follow up on them." No one said thank you. No one followed up on it. No one recognized them in a team meeting. You could write them a handwritten note and say thank you, and maybe it's from the CEO of the organization or something like that. None of that even costs money. But like that's the blocking and the tackling, the dribbling and passing of basketball that we need to get to before we start executing on plays and dunking.
You mentioned handwritten note, and to me, that's part of company culture, right? Yeah. That's part of the fabric that defines an organization. And if someone cares enough to send a handwritten note, wonder how they're going to treat you when you actually work there. That seems like a really good recommendation. And another thing I heard, and I want to just bring this out as a point, that's a great takeaway from the podcast here, is that you should survey your team and really understand first of all, would a referral bonus make an impact? And if so, how much would that be? And then, so you might be thinking the referral bonus needs to be $500, and your team might tell you, well, it might be $250, So you may, it's good to always interview your team and try to find that out. So those are two good points. One other thing you mentioned is filling administrative roles remotely. So we talked a little bit about that. You talked a little bit about that. What tasks would you recommend that they do? So the administrative people that you would outsource that to, what are the tasks that they would do?
I know I'm a little bit of a broken record. I'm sorry. This is all going to be in context of the community culture and what's really important. So, like, I want to put that out there because what's appropriate for one community and one organization might not be the same. So, I want to recognize that now. What you can outsource, human resources, and some of the like more administrative, repetitive tasks that get in there that keep the workers that are there in those roles from being able to do the stuff that actually would generate revenue, like surveying, like, those experiences. That stuff is all things that you could outsource. There's certain parts of finance and accounting. Absolutely. I've seen invoicing. I've seen IT. Obviously, there's like, it's not administrative, but dining and that kind of thing. Now, like nowadays, like I would take a note out of the book of a couple other industries and go to the fractional community and go to the online spaces where ask yourself, if that person needs to be in this building, what purpose does that serve? And at least now, when you go to fill that position, you know why you're hiring, instead of taking help from someone who really could do a good job but might not live in the city, in the state, et cetera. So that's just a couple ideas. But I would also, like, this is where I get a little bit controversial. I would push back on the necessity, because is it necessity or is it tradition? I don't know how many times, even from, I'll stick to what I know, an HR perspective, where I've even been comfortable talking to someone about a pay stub. I really do want to interact with someone virtually or interact with that information virtually. I'm okay with that. Most of the communication that happens is via email and text now, or chat anyway. And so, like, I don't know that all of that needs to happen. And we're meeting on Google Meet today and doing just fine. We've never shook hands. And I think that if we can have this kind of a dialogue virtually, you probably could get away with more than you think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you mentioned international recruiting too, a few minutes ago, and I want to just circle back on that real quick. And I know you're not an attorney, so I'm not asking you for legal advice or anything like that. But what are some regulatory issues or legal issues that senior living communities need to be aware of when they're looking maybe to hire internationally?
Yeah. So a couple of different things. Are those individuals going to stay there or come here? Those are two very different paths. Obviously, coming here, I would definitely talk to a labor and immigration attorney, and there's some that actually specialize in the space. Again, happy to make those connections if you'd like that. Second thing is, if a lot of folks think, if I hired someone who doesn't live in the United States, like, now I have to be an expert on Canadian labor law, or I don't know, Kenyan labor law. Not the case. There are actually companies, they're called employers of record, EORs, that do that work for you and do it at a fraction of the cost. We're not one of them, but our model is similar to the United States. So you get connected there. There's also models out there that just do all the sourcing for you. And then, you pay a flat rate and say, here's how much work I need. Like that's another model. So it's, if you're considering it, it's like, are you wanting them to stay there or come here? Do you want to find the person yourself or not? And what is your budget ideally? What's your goal? And again, if we're leading with why, Rick, like if we're talking about mission, your mission doesn't have to be like, I'm in, Minneapolis, Minnesota, only in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Like, you think about how powerful that could be if, like, your mission is now transcending borders. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. The employer of record concept was new to me. We actually learned about that, interestingly enough, when trying to hire a freelance developer. We were looking in Colombia for that. And there are a lot of laws in Colombia about how people are hired and how long they're retained and things like that. And the employer of record would handle all of that. So that's an interesting model that I wasn't aware of, that I never thought of senior living organizations maybe using that model. But that's interesting that you bring that up. One of the big complaints that I hear as I talk to people at senior living organizations is that they just don't get enough applicants. for all of the jobs. So what are some strategies that you all use to increase the number of applicants?
Sure. Um, Now, you got to put your sales hat on. We talked about marketing. We got to put your sales hat on if you're talking about this. And it's a funnel, just like anything else would be. One strategy I will say is if you don't have a good applicant tracking system, you should look at one. Part of that is the fish you catch might not be the fish you need, but if you had a way to keep them in an aquarium for a while, they might be the fish you need tomorrow. And so an applicant tracking system can help you keep track of that stuff, or maybe it wasn't a fit for timing, maybe skill, but in 1, 2, 3, 5 years down the line, you've had this relationship, they're aware of your employment brand, and maybe you don't need to get as many applicants in the door if you do a good job there. That's one thing. Second thing I would say is don't view recruitment as an event. It is a process that is inherently important to the operation and success of your organization. It's always, even if you're lucky enough to have 0 open recs, I promise you something unknown is going to happen. Promise. Like that person's going to retire early. That person's going to move across the country. So-and-so gets sick. So-and-so has a complete change of heart. Like, I don't know, and we've all seen it. So when you're most comfortable is probably when you should start making some of those relationships, because it takes time and it'll come off as authentic. So give yourself some leeway. And you know what? The third thing I'll recommend, ask for help. There's organizations, partially like ours, and there's others that do a great job of it, that can help you. And you don't necessarily need to learn dependence on those folks. But if you're really struggling with it, there's people that's what their job is. That's how they make a living. They have an entire company that does that. And if you're going to outsource part of it, learn from them. While they're doing it, don't just say, all right, that's done. They're going to help us. We're going to give them X amount of money. Learn from them. Ask questions. What are you doing? What systems do you use? How does it work? All that kind of thing. Learn from the education. The fourth thing I will say is, don't rush into the hire just because you need to. There's organizations out there, and again, I don't want to name drop, that can help, not even out with agency. There's organizations that we all know that can at least bridge that gap for you, so you can make sure that when you bring somebody on, it's the right fit. That's the last thing you need, is just to hey, my spreadsheet says I got X number of open racks. I need to fill it. We're moving on. Well, life ain't in a spreadsheet. So let's make sure that, yes, we keep in aware of our KPIs, but also that we understand that people are people, right?
Yeah, a couple of things I wrote down here, Kacey, that I just wanted to underscore again. I think, applicant tracking systems, or, it could even be just having a section of your CRM that's devoted to, having people that have applied for jobs in the past. You can go back and index that, and then maybe send them an email or place a phone call if you have an opening. Those people have already reached out to you. Maybe it's in the past, but that's a great idea. And the other is, I wrote down, never stop recruiting. So just, they always say, always be selling, always be recruiting, right? So always have that hat on. What are some best practices for conducting interviews? So you've gotten people in the door, you've finally gotten someone to come in or talk to you, either on the phone or in person. What are some best practices for conducting those interviews and then selecting the right candidates?
Great. Yeah, absolutely. So very practical. I would work on skills-based or behavior-based interviews. So there's several things you can Google. And again, if this is top of mind, reach out. We'll get you connected to some really great tools. But the more you can say, instead of how do you deal with customer service or something like that? Walk me through examples and, quick model, situation or task, action and result, the STAR model. And then you can also say, how did that make you feel? And that way you're guiding to understand. You got a complete question of all right, that's one example of how they handle customer service. What about another one, whatever it is, and really hone in to understand in the past, what have they done? The second tip, don't assume that your applicants know your organization or can learn fast enough via your website or what you said to hone their answers and translate their experience directly into the role that you're trying to fill, because there's so much context that they just never will have. That's your job. And that's how you find diamonds in the rough. So like, try to see some common threads and understand it's like, oh, well, so-and-so's never done X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, they have worked really closely with X, Y, and Z's cousin. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that much of a stretch. And hey, I know senior living operations, or I know this part of the business, and this person has like really good experience in general. Like, I think they could learn it. Like that's the other side thing I would say is like, don't just look for, all right, this person's been doing the exact thing I'm looking for the last 5 or 10 years. Like you got to develop talent. And by the way, when you do that, you're also going to develop loyalty.
What do you think about ideal candidate profiles? So that's just for our audience. Let's say everyone has great skilled talent that works at their community. What do you think about maybe defining what makes an ideal employee or frontline worker or CNA or whatever someone might be looking for? What do you think about that process of defining that ideal candidate profile? Is that something worth doing, and how would you do that?
Yeah, I think it's worth doing, because if you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere else. Like, rest in peace, Toby Keith. But that starts with, I'd say, being crystal clear on what your values are as an organization. And not just like, when I say that, I think that's the first exercise. I don't think it's what you want them to be. I think it's what they are. And understanding like reality of what your organization really cares about. Ideally, then you're going back to, have they demonstrated the ability to do so the job function, or have they demonstrated the ability to learn something similar? So if you have the values of the organization, one process I really recommend is going through not just a job description, but a job scorecard of like, fast forward, it's a year down the line. How are you conducting that person's performance review? Like, what are you talking about? And if you don't know, you should probably know now, because why set them up to fail or change the rules of the game when you've already put them in and the cameras are on, right? So if you can go through there, then that should inform who you're talking to. That should inform the interview questions you're asking, some of the behaviors and skills you dive into on each individual interview as well. Begin with the end in mind is the adage I'll give you there.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Kacey. So if someone wants to learn more about you and your company, how would they do that?
Yeah. Company first, www.procarehr.com. Go on there. We have a bunch of really great guides and information there. We're also increasing a following on YouTube. And then from an administrative side, LinkedIn is primarily where we've been posting a lot of content. And I would recommend, connecting with and following our leaders. Obviously, I'm one of them. I'm active on LinkedIn, but our co-CEOs are, anybody who's a leader in our organization is really somebody who cares about HR, cares about senior housing, senior living, and senior care, and wants to help. So I would say go there, and we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And if worst case, we're probably at that next conference you're going to as well.
Sounds good. Well, Kacey, listen, we all have the same amount of time in every day, and I just want to thank you. I'm very grateful that you took time to be on our podcast today. I know there's so many things that I wrote down. I've got about 1.5 pages of notes here. Hopefully the people that are listening, if they're not walking their dog or on the treadmill or something like that, or traveling, hopefully they are able to write some notes down too. I think you've given us a lot of great information about hiring people. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Kacey Devine for Procare HR. Hopefully you took as many notes as I did in the conversation. There are a lot of senior living organizations right now struggling to hire people. I hope yours is not one of them, but if it is, hopefully there was something that you learned here in this conversation today. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of the Senior Care Growth Show, where senior living sales and marketing leaders go to grow. I'm Rick Whittington. Have a great day.